Hello Enterprise class, right? We're ready to read a little bit more of Harry Potter and we are back with our little friend. Okay, are you ready? This is called Mudblood and Murmurs. Harry spent a lot of time over the next few days dodging out of sight whenever he saw Gilderoy Lockhart coming down a corridor. Harder to avoid than Colin Creevey, he seemed to have memorised Harry's timetable. Nothing seemed to give Colin a bigger thrill than to say, "All right, Harry," 6 or 7 times a day, or hear, "Hello, Colin," back, however exasperated Harry sounded when he said it. Hedwig was still angry with Harry about the disastrous car journey, and Ron's wand was still malfunctioning, surpassing itself on Friday morning by shooting out of Ron's hand in charms and hitting tiny old Professor Flitwick squarely between the eyes, creating a large, throbbing, green boil where it had struck. So, with one thing and another, Harry was quite glad to reach the weekend. He, Ron and Hermione were planning to visit Hagrid on Saturday morning. Harry, however, was shaken awake several hours earlier than he would have liked by Oliver Wood, captain of the Gryffindor Quidditch team. "What's the matter?" said Harry groggily. "Quidditch practice," said Wood. "Come on." Harry squinted at the window. There was a thin mist hanging across the pink and gold sky. Now he was awake, he couldn't understand how he could have slept through the racket of the birds were making. "Oliver," Harry croaked. "It's the crack of dawn." "Exactly," said Wood. He was a tall and burly 6th year, and at the moment his eyes were gleaming with mad enthusiasm. "It's part of our new training programme. Come on, grab your broom, let's go," said Wood heartily. "None of the other teams have started training yet. We're going to be the first on the mark this year." Yawning and shivering slightly, Harry climbed out of bed and tried to find his Quidditch robes. "Good man," said Wood. "Meet you on the pitch in 15 minutes. When he'd found his scarlet team robes and pulled on his cloak for warmth, Harry scribbled a note to Ron explaining where he'd gone and went down the spiral staircase to the common room, his Nimbus 2000 on his shoulder. He had just reached the portrait hall when there was a clatter behind him, and Colin Creevey came dashing down the spiral staircase, his camera swinging madly around his neck and something clutched in his hand. "I heard someone saying your name on the stairs, Harry. Look what I've got here. I've had it developed. I wanted to show you." Harry looked bemuseled at the photograph Colin was brandishing under his nose. A moving black and white Lockhart was tugging hard on an arm Harry recognised as his own. He was pleased to see that his photographic self was putting up a good fight and refusing to be dragged into view. As Harry watched, Lockhart gave up and slumped panting against the white edge of the picture. "Will you sign it?" said Colin eagerly. "No," said Harry flatly, glancing around to check the room. It was really deserted. "Sorry, Colin, I'm in a hurry. Quidditch practice." He climbed through the portrait hole. "Oh, wow! Wait for me. I've never watched a Quidditch game before." Colin scrambled through the hole after him. "It'll be really boring," Harry said quickly, but Colin ignored him, his face shining with excitement. "You were the youngest house player in 100 years, weren't you, Harry? Weren't you?" said Colin, trotting alongside him. "You must be brilliant. I've never flown. Is it easy? Is that your own broom? Is that the best one there is?" Harry didn't know how to get rid of him. It was like having an extremely talkative shadow. "I don't really understand Quidditch," said Colin breathlessly. "Is it true there are 4 balls, and 2 of them fly around trying to knock people off their brooms?" "Yes," said Harry heavily, resigned to explaining the complicated rules of Quidditch. "They're called bludgers. There are 2 beaters on each team who carry clubs to beat the bludgers away from their side. Fred and George Weasley are the Gryffindor beaters." "And what are the other balls for?" Colin asked, tripping down a couple of steps because he was gazing open-mouthed at Harry. "Well, the quaffle, that's the big reddish one, is the one that scores goals. 3 chasers on each team throw the quaffle to each other and trying to get it through the goalpost at the end of the pitch. They're 3 long poles with hoops on the end. And the 4th ball is the golden snitch," said Harry. "And it's very small, very fast and difficult to catch. But that's what the sneakers got to do, because a game of Quidditch doesn't end until a snitch has been caught. And whichever team's seeker gets the snitch earns his team an extra 150 points. "And you're Gryffindor's seeker, aren't you?" said Colin in awe. "Yes," said Harry, as they left the castle and started across the dew-drenched grass. "And there's the keeper too. He guards the goalpost. That's it, really." But Colin didn't stop questioning Harry all the way down to the sloping lawn to the Quidditch pitch, and Harry only shook him off when he reached the changing rooms. Colin called after him in a piping voice, "I'll go and get a good seat, Harry," and hurried off into the stands. The rest of the Gryffindor team were already in the changing room. Wood was the only person who looked truly awake. Fred and George Weasley were sitting, puffy-eyed and tousled-haired, next to a fourth year, Alicia Spinnet, who seemed to be nodding off against the wall behind her. Her fellow chasers, Katie Bell and Angelina Johnson, were yawning side by side opposite them. "There you are, Harry. What kept you?" said Wood briskly. "Now, I wanted a quick talk with you all before we actually get onto the pitch, because I spent the summer devising a whole new training programme, which I really think will make the difference." Wood holds up a large diagram of the Quidditch pitch, on which he's drawn many lines, arrows and crosses and different coloured inks. He took out his wand and tapped the board, and the arrows began to wiggle all over the diagram like caterpillars. As Wood launched into a speech about his new tactics, Fred and Weasley's head drooped right into Alicia Spinnet's shoulder. He began to snore. The first board took nearly 20 minutes to explain, but there was another board under that, and a third under that one. Harry sank into a stupor as Wood droned on and on. "So," said Wood at long last, jerking Harry from his wistful fantasy about what he could be eating for breakfast at this very moment up at the castle. "Is that clear? Any questions?" "I've got a question, Oliver," said George, who had woken with a start. "Why couldn't you have told us this yesterday when we were awake?" Wood wasn't pleased. "Now listen here, you lot," he said, glowering at them all. "We should have won the Quidditch Cup last year. We're easily the best team, but unfortunately, owing to circumstances beyond our control—" Harry shifted guiltily in his seat. He had been unconscious in the hospital wing for the final match of the previous year, meaning that Gryffindor had been a player short and had suffered their worst defeat in 300 years. Wood took a moment to regain control of himself. Their last defeat was clearly still torturing him. "So, this year we train harder than ever before, okay? Let's go and put our new theories into practice," Wood shouted, seizing his broomstick and leading the way out of the changing rooms. Stiff-legged and still yawning, his team followed. They had been in the changing room so long that the sun was up properly now, although remnants of the mist hung over the grass in the stadium. As Harry walked onto the pitch, he saw Ron and Hermione sitting in the stands. "Are you finished yet?" called Ron. "Haven't even started," said Harry, looking jealously at the toast and marmalade Ron and Harry had brought out of the Great Hall. "Wood's been teaching new moves." He mounted his broomstick and kicked at the ground, soaring into the air. The cool morning air whipped his face, waking him far more efficiently than Wood's long talk. It felt wonderful to be back on the Quidditch pitch. He soared right around the stadium at full speed, racing Fred and George. "What's that funny clicking noise?" called Fred as he hurtled round the corner. Harry looked into the stand. Colin was sitting on one of the highest seats, his camera raised, taking picture after picture, the sound strangely magnified in the deserted stadium. "Look this way, Harry, this way!" he shrilled. "Who's that?" said Fred. "No idea," Harry lied, putting on a spurt of speed that took him as far away as possible from Colin. "What's going on?" said Wood, frowning as he skimmed through the air towards them. "Why is that first year taking pictures? I don't like it. He could be a Slytherin spy trying to find out about our new training programme." "He's in Gryffindor," said Harry quickly. "And the Slytherins don't need a spy, Oliver," said George. "What makes you say that?" said Wood testily. "Because they're here in person," said George, pointing. Several people in green robes were walking to the pitch, broomsticks in hands. "I don't believe it," Wood hissed in outrage. "I booked the pitch for today." "We'll see about this." Wood shot towards the ground, landing rather hard than he meant to in his anger, staggering slightly as he dismounted. Harry, Fred and George followed. "Flint," Wood bellowed at the Slytherin captain, "this is our practice time. We got up specially. You can clear off now." Marcus Flint was even larger than Wood. He had a look of a trollish cunning on his face, and he replied, "Plenty of room for us, Wood." Angelina, Alicia and Katie had come over too. There were no girls on the Slytherin team, who stood shoulder to shoulder facing the Gryffindors, leering to a man. "But I booked the pitch," said Wood, positively spitting with rage. "I booked it." "Ah," said Flint, "but I've got a specially signed note here from Professor Snape. I, Professor Snape, give the Slytherin team permission to practice today on the Quidditch pitch, owing to the need to train their new Seeker." "You've got a new Seeker," said Wood, distracted. "Where?" And from behind the 6 large figures before them came a 7th, smaller boy, smirking all over his pale, pointed face. It was Draco Malfoy. "Aren't you Lucius Malfoy's son?" said Fred, looking at Malfoy with dislike. "Funny you should mention Draco's father," said Flint, as the whole Slytherin team smiled still more broadly. "Let me show you the generous gift he made to the Slytherin team." All 7 of them held out their broomsticks, 7 highly polished brand new handles, and 7 sets of fine gold lettering spelling the words Nimbus 2001, gleaming under the Gryffindors' noses in the early morning sun. "Very latest model. Came out last month," said Flint, carelessly flicking a speck of dust from the end of his own. "I believe it outstrips the old 2000 series by a considerable amount. As for the old Clean Sweeps," he smiled nastily at Fred and George, who were both clutching Clean Sweeps 5s. "Sweeps the board with them. Sweeps the board with them." None of the Gryffindor team could think of anything to say for a moment. Malfoy was smirking so broadly his cold eyes were reduced to slits. "Oh, look," said Flint. "A pitch invasion." Ron and Hermione were crossing the grass to see what was going on. "What's happening?" Ron said to Harry. "Why aren't you playing? And what's he doing here?" He was looking at Malfoy, taking in his Slytherin Quidditch robes. "I'm the new Slytherin Seeker, Weasley," said Malfoy smugly. "Everyone's just been admiring the brooms my father bought our team." Ron gaped open-mouthed at 7 superb broomsticks in front of him. "Good, aren't they?" said Malfoy smoothly. "But perhaps the Gryffindor team will need to be able to raise some gold to get some new brooms too. You could raffle those Clean Sweep 5s, I expect. A museum would bid for them." The Slytherin team howled with laughter. "At least no one on the Gryffindor team had to buy their way in," said Hermione sharply. "They got in on pure talent." The smug look on Malfoy's face flickered. "No one asked your opinion, you filthy mudblood," he spat. Harry knew at once that Malfoy had said something really bad, because there was an instant uproar in his words. Flint had to dive in front of Malfoy to stop Fred and George jumping on him. Alicia shrieked, "How dare you!" and Ron plunged his hand into his robe and pulled out his wand, yelling, "You'll pay for that, Malfoy," and pointed it furiously at Flint's arm and at Malfoy's face. A large bang echoed across the stadium as a jet of green light shot out the wrong end of Harry's wand, hitting him in the stomach and sending him reeling backwards onto the grass. "Ron! Ron! Are you all right?" squealed Hermione. Ron opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, he gave an almighty belch, and several slugs dribbled out of his mouth and onto his lap. The Slytherin team were paralysed with laughter. Flint was doubled up, hanging onto his new broomstick for support. Malfoy was on all fours, banging onto the ground with his fist. The Gryffindors were gathered around Ron, who kept belching large, glistening slugs. Nobody seemed to want to touch him. "We'd better get him to Hagrid's. It's nearest," said Harry to Hermione, who nodded bravely, and the pair of them pulled Ron up by the arms. "What happened, Harry? What happened? Is he ill? But you can't cure him, can you?" Colin had run down from his seat and was now dancing alongside them as they left the pitch. Ron gave a huge heave and more slugs dribbled down his front. "Ooh," said Colin, fascinated and raising his camera. "Can you hold him still, Harry?" "Get out of the way, Colin," said Harry angrily, and he and Hermione supported Ron out of the stadium and across the grounds near to the edge of the forest. "Nearly there, Ron," said Hermione as the gamekeeper cabin came into view. "You'll be all right in a minute. Almost there." They were within 20 feet in Hagrid's house when the front door opened. But it wasn't Hagrid who emerged. Gilderoy Lockhart, wearing robes of the palest mauve today, came striding out. "Quick, behind here," Harry hissed, dragging Ron behind a nearby bush. Hermione followed somewhat reluctantly. "It's a simple matter, if you know what you're doing," Lockhart was saying loudly to Hagrid. "If you need help, you know where I am. I'll let you have a copy of my book. I'm surprised you haven't got one already. I'll sign one tonight and send it over. Oh, goodbye," and he strode towards the castle. Harry waited until Lockhart was out of sight and pulled Ron out of the bush and up to Hagrid's front door. They knocked urgently. Hagrid appeared at once, looking very grumpy, but his expression brightened when he saw who it was. "Been wondering when you'd come to see me. Come in, come in. Thought you might have been Professor Lockhart and back again." Harry and Hermione supported Ron over the threshold into the one-roomed cabin, which had an enormous bed in the corner, a fire crackling merrily in another. Hagrid didn't seem perturbed by Ron's slug problem, which Harry hastily explained as he lowered Ron into a chair. "Better out than in," he said cheerfully, plonking a large copper basin in front of him. "Get 'em all up, Ron." "I don't think there's anything to do except wait for it to stop," said Hermione anxiously, watching Ron bend over the basin. "That's a difficult curse to work at the best of times, but with a broken wand." Hagrid was bustling around making them tea. He boarhound Fang was slobbering over Harry. "What did Lockhart want with you, Hagrid?" Harry asked, scratching Fang's ear. "Giving me advice on getting kelpies out of a well," growled Hagrid, moving a half-plucked rooster off his scrubbed table and setting down a teapot. "Like I dunno. And banging on about some banshee he banished. If one word of it is true, I'll eat my kettle." It was most unlike Hagrid to criticise a Hogwarts teacher, and Harry looked at him with surprise. Hermione, however, said, in a voice somewhat higher than usual, "I think you're being a bit unfair. Professor Dumbledore obviously thought he was the best man for the job." "He was the only man for the job," said Hagrid, offering them a plate of treacle fudge, while Ron coughed squelchily into the basin. "And I mean, the only one. Getting very difficult to find one for the dark arts job. People aren't too keen to take it on, see? They're starting to think it's jinxed. No one lasted long for a while. So tell me," said Hagrid, jerking his head to Ron, "who were you trying to curse?" "Malfoy called Hermione something. It must have been really bad because everyone went mad." "It was bad," said Ron hoarsely, emerging over the tabletop looking pale and sweaty. "Malfoy called her a mudblood, Hagrid." Ron dived out of sight again as a fresh wave of slugs made their appearance. Hagrid looked outraged. "He didn't," he growled at Hermione. "He did," she said, "but I don't know what it means. I could tell it was really rude, of course." "It's about the most insulting thing you could think of," gasped Ron, coming back up. "Mudblood's a really foul name for someone who was muggle-born. You know, non-magic parents. There are some wizards, like the Malfoy family, who think they're better than everybody else because they're what people call pure bloods." He gave a small burp and a single slug fell out of his outstretched hand. He threw it into the basin and continued, "I mean, the rest of us know it doesn't mean any difference. Look at Neville Longbottom. He's pure blood, and he can hardly stand a cauldron up the right way. And they haven't invented a spell our Hermione can't do," said Hagrid proudly, making Hermione go a brilliant shade of magenta. "It's a disgusting thing to call someone," said Ron, wiping his sweaty brow and shaking his hand. "Dirty blood, see? Common blood. It's mad. Most wizards these days are half-blood anyway. If we hadn't married muggles, we'd have died out." He reached and ducked out of sight again. "Well, I don't blame you for trying to curse him, Ron," said Hagrid loudly over the thunders of more slugs hitting the basin. "But maybe it was a good thing your wand backfired." Expect Lucius Malfoy would have come marching up to the school if you cursed his son. Least you're not in trouble. Harry would have pointed out that trouble didn't come much worse than having slugs pouring out of your mouth, but he couldn't. Hagrid's treacle toffee had cemented his jaw shut. Harry, said Hagrid suddenly, as though struck by a sudden thought, got a bone to pick with you. I've heard you've been giving out signed photos. How come I haven't got one? Furious, Harry wrenched his teeth apart. I have not been giving out signed photos, he said hostilely. If Lockhart's still putting that about. But then he saw that Hagrid was laughing. I'm only joking, he said, patting Harry gently on the back and sending him face first into the table. I knew you hadn't really. I told Lockhart you didn't need to. You're more famous than him without trying. Bet he didn't like that, said Harry, sitting up and rubbing his chin. Don't think he did, said Hagrid, his eyes twinkling. And then I got told I'd never read one of his books, and he decided to go treacle toffee rum. Treacle toffee rum, he added, and as Ron reappeared. No thanks, said Ron weakly. Better not risk it. Come and see what I've been growing, he said, as Harry and Hermione finished their last of their tea. In the small vegetable patch behind Hagrid's house, there was a dozen of large pumpkins. Each was the size of a large boulder. Getting on well, aren't they? Said Hagrid happily. For the Halloween feast. Should be big enough by then. Hagrid looked over his shoulder to check that they were alone. Well, I've been giving them, a bit of help. Harry noticed Hagrid's flowery pink umbrella leaning against the back of the cabin. Harry had reason to believe before now that the umbrella was not all it looked. In fact, he had the strong impression that Hagrid's old school wand was concealed inside it. Hagrid wasn't supposed to use magic. He had been expelled from Hogwarts in his 3rd year, but Harry had never found out why. Any mention of the matter, and Hagrid would clear his throat loudly and become mysteriously deaf until the subject was changed. An engorgement charm, I suppose, said Hermione, halfway between disapproval and amusement. Well, you've done a good job on them. That's what your little sister said Hagrid, nodding at Ron. Met her just yesterday. Hagrid looked sideways at Harry, his beard twitching. Said she was just looking round the grounds, but I reckon she was hoping she might run into someone at my house. He winked at Harry. If you ask me, she wouldn't say no to a signed... Oh, shut up, said Harry. Ron snorted with laughter, and the ground was sprayed with slugs. Watch it, Hagrid roared, pulling Ron away from his precious pumpkins. It was nearly lunchtime, and as Harry had only had one bite of treacle fudge since dawn, he was keen to get back up to the school and eat. They said goodbye to Hagrid and walked back up to the castle. Ron hiccuped occasionally, only bringing up 2 very small slugs. They had barely set foot in the cool entrance hall when a voice rang out. You there, Potter, Weasley. Professor McGonagall was walking towards them looking stern. You will both do your detention this evening. What are we doing, Professor? Said Ron nervously, suppressing a burp. You will be polishing the silver in the trophy room with Mr. Filch, said Professor McGonagall. And no magic, Weasley, elbow grease. Ron gulped. Argus Filch was the caretaker. He was loathed by every student in the school. And you, Potter, will be helping Professor Lockhart answer his fan mail, said Professor McGonagall. Oh no. Can I go and do the trophy room too? said Harry desperately. Certainly not, said Professor McGonagall, raising her eyebrow. Professor Lockhart requested you particularly. 8 o'clock sharp, both of you. Harry and Ron slouched in the great hall in the state of deepest gloom. Hermione behind them, wearing a you did break the school rules sort of expression. Harry didn't fancy his shepherd's pie as much as he thought. Both he and Ron felt as though they'd got the worst deals. Filch'll have me there all night, said Ron heavily. No magic. There must be about 100 cups in that room. I'm no good at muggle cleaning. I'd swap any time, said Harry hollowly. I've had loads of practice with the Dursleys. Answering Lockhart's fan mail, it'll be a nightmare. Saturday afternoon seemed to melt away in what seemed like no time. It was 5 minutes to 8, and Harry was dragging his feet along the second-floor corridor to Lockhart's office. He gritted his teeth and knocked. The door flew open at once. Lockhart beamed down at him. "Ah, here's the scallywag," he said. "Come in, Harry, come in." Shining brightly on the walls, lit by many candles, were countless framed photos of Lockhart. He had even signed a few of them. Another large pile lay on his desk. "You can address the envelopes," Lockhart told Harry, as though it was a huge treat. "The first one's to Gladys Gudgeon. Bless her, huge fan of mine." The minutes snailed by. Harry let Lockhart's voice wash over him occasionally, saying and right and yeah. Now and then he caught a phrase like, "Fame's a fickle friend, Harry," or "Celebrity is as celebrity does. Remember that." The candles burned lower and lower, making the light dance over many moving faces of Lockhart's watching him. Harry moved his aching hand over what felt like the 1,000th envelope, writing out Veronica Smethly's address. It must be nearly time to leave, Harry thought miserably. Please let it be nearly time. And then he heard something quite apart from the spitting of dying candles and Lockhart's prattle about fans. It was a voice. A voice to chill the bone marrow, a voice of breathtaking ice-cold venom. Come to me. Let me rip you. Let me tear you. Let me kill you." Harry gave a huge jump, and a large lilac bolt appeared on Veronica Smethly's street. "What?" he said loudly. "I know," said Lockhart. 6 solid months at the top, the bestseller book. Broke all records." "No," said Harry frantically. "That voice." "Sorry," said Lockhart, looking puzzled. "What voice?" That voice that said, didn't you hear it?" Lockhart was looking at Harry in high astonishment. "What are you talking about, Harry? Perhaps you're getting a little drowsy." "Great Scots, look at the time. We've been here nearly 4 hours. I'd never have believed it. The time has flown, hasn't it?" Harry didn't answer. He was straining his ears to hear the voice again, but there was no sound now, except for Lockhart telling him he mustn't expect a treat like this every time he got detention. Feeling dazed, Harry left. It was so late that the Gryffindor common room was almost empty. Harry went straight up to the dormitory. Ron wasn't back yet. Harry put on his pyjamas and got into bed and waited. Half an hour later, Ron arrived, nursing his right arm and bringing a strong smell of polish into the darkened room. "My muscles have all seized up," he groaned, sinking into his bed. 14 times he made me buff that Quidditch cup before he was satisfied, and then I had another slug attack all over the special awards for service to school. Took ages to shift the slime. How was Lockhart? Keeping his voice low so not to wake Neville, Dean and Seamus, Harry told Ron exactly what he'd heard. "And Lockhart said he couldn't hear it," said Ron. Harry could see him frowning in the moonlight. Do you think he was lying? But I don't get it. Even someone invisible would have had to have opened the door. "I know," said Harry, lying back on his 4-poster bed, staring at the canopy above him. "I don't get it either." I wonder where the voice came from. The next chapter is called Death Day Party. See you later.